French press review now. Flo with us here on set. Papers focusing on the aftermath of Sunday's second round of the parliamentary elections here in France. Spotlight really on what that new parliament is going to look like, isn't it?
That's right. La Croix, the Catholic paper, talks about the new face of the French parliament, the lower house of parliament. They got quite a facelift, according to La Croix. The parliament essentially is quite renewed. 430 of the newly elected MPs weren't in the previous assembly. 430 out of 577. It's quite spectacular. 75% of the parliament was renewed. This is a record in French politics. And La Croix, you can see here, talking about this new face, saying the change that was promised has arrived. So quite enthusiastic about this new parliament.
It's quite incredible, isn't it? I mean, lots and lots of fresh faces. Their parliament that is much more young and much more feminine as well.
Lup says it's changed so much you wouldn't even recognize the new parliament. The average age of MPs has dropped by 5 years. It's down to 48 years old and 8 months and a couple of days, quite precise there. And a record number of women were elected, 223. That's 68 more than the previous parliament. And that brings the percentage of women in parliament up to 38.65%. 38.65%. That is a record here in France, but it's still far from, of course, the 50% gender equality line.
So we've got younger, we've got more feminine as well. We've also got more business orientation.
Indeed, in L'Opinion, the pro-business paper, is focusing on this angle. Nearly 50 of these new MPs have or are currently running a business. Will these business-minded MPs manage to dust things off? That we can see it here. This is the front page of L'Opinion, and this cartoon you can see here shows the flip side of that. You can see here the three representatives of the big trade unions here in France. The one that's fainted there, Philippe Martinez from the CGT trade union, which often is at loggerheads with business leaders. You can see he's fainted there. The others are saying, well, he fainted because he just realized how many business leaders have just entered this new parliament.
So those freshly elected MPs, they're starting to make their way to the National Assembly. It's a little bit like first day of school, isn't it? Do you think they've all got new rubbers and pencil sharpeners?
They have new bags, new
exactly.
pencils, new paper.
Yeah.
The National Assembly is located in the heart of Paris in something called the Palais Bourbon, and it's really bustling with activity. You have outgoing MPs who are packing up boxes, new MPs arriving. It's really like orientation, and Libé has a pretty sweet story about it here, talking about these wide-eyed newbies that are getting familiar with the place, because remember, 423 of these MPs have never been MP before. So they're discovering the Palais Bourbon. Some say, they've only been once on a class trip, etc. And so they're starting to just realize the task at hand. Libé says that some of these newly elected lawmakers can't even get over the fact that they actually won their race. And you can see this quote here. Apparently, you have to ask for an office with a bed in it. I think some are starting to realize how much hard work is ahead. I know what you might be thinking, but essentially long days and short nights for these MPs.
I think I've got a dirty mind for it. Now, many papers are applauding the novelty of a new parliament. Others, though, they're wanting it's not diverse enough, aren't they?
Well, Libération waters down the enthusiasm a little bit and says, look, okay, it's a younger, more dynamic, more feminine parliament, but it's not diverse enough. And on their front page, you can see that it says, this is an aired-out room. Essentially, the National Assembly has been aired out. But if you actually look at these new MPs, they're not very diverse. For instance, everyone's been talking about En Marche, La République En Marche, and these MPs from civil society who aren't groomed in the old-fashioned political way. But if you take a closer look at them, they're very similar in terms of education and socio-professional background. And that doesn't reflect the statistical diversity of France. For instance, there are very few MPs that are blue-collar workers, very few MPs who are farmers. Many of them are, white-collar workers from the private sector. That being said, Libération says this new group is very optimistic, tolerant, open-minded, and driven. It's a new group of people, and it's radical change from what Libération calls the glum, defeatist group that has paralyzed the intellectual scene for decades.
we shall see what happens. Let's move on to something completely different. The papers are also focusing on that incident on the Champs-Elysées we talked about. A car loaded with gas canisters ramming into a police van, leaving the driver dead in what the Interior Minister was an attempted attack there.
It's front page news here in France. It's on the front page of Le Parisien that talks about how this really comes in a tense climate here in France, but also in the UK. Both countries have experienced a string of attacks in recent weeks. So you can see they're talking about menaces à répétition, so repeated threats in both the France and the UK. The Interior Minister, Richard Collomb, said that yesterday's incident justifies a further extension of France's state of emergency, which hasn't been in place since the November attacks of 2015. You can read about it here in Slate. Now, the state of emergency has been in the spotlight recently because Emmanuel Macron's government says it wants to end the state of emergency, but at the same time integrate several of its exceptional anti-terrorism powers into common law. And this has alarmed judges and civil liberty groups. But let's end on something completely different. Some news from outer space. You can read about this in L'Obs. It's nice to leave Earth every now and then. This is talking about the telescope, the space telescope Kepler, that's identified 219 potential new worlds, and 10 of these exoplanets are the size, well, a size similar to Earth, and in inhabitable zones. So this is giving a boost to hopes in the search of alien life, and hope to all of us, or you, or maybe some people, who find Earth a little bit depressing these days.
Shall we move?
Let's move.
We've got a new parliament. It's not depressing, Flo. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Flo Vilman over the papers. She'll be back at International Papers later on.